Hey there, friend. Richie G's on the move again, taking steps to clear the mind in a place where you never walk alone. Yeah, it's an open space filled with grace, where everybody gets to know Jesus' name.
Imagine for a second that you are just walking down the street, right? And you find a prescription bottle sitting right there on the sidewalk.
Just lying there on the concrete.
Exactly. So you pick it up, you read the label, and it says something intense, like take 2 pills every single morning to stop severe internal bleeding.
Which hopefully you wouldn't just pop open and swallow.
Right, because you don't have internal bleeding. You just inherently understand that this specific, highly potent medicine was prescribed for a specific patient.
Someone who is, going through an acute physical crisis.
Yeah, exactly. Yet when we read ancient texts, specifically some of the most debated letters in history, we have this terrible habit of swallowing someone else's prescription without ever checking the patient's name on the bottle. So welcome to today's deep dive. Today we're exploring an excerpted script titled Paul's Context for Women in Ministry.
And it is a really remarkable look at how the loss of historical context can just completely warp the intended meaning of a document.
Oh, absolutely.
We are going to examine the actual on-the-ground crises that prompted some of the most controversial writing in the ancient world.
Right, because we are specifically talking about the Apostle Paul's commands for women to remain silent in church.
Which is a heavy topic.
Very. Whether you grew up in a religious tradition or, I don't know, you've just taken a Western literature class, you have probably bumped into these verses. You find them primarily in 1 Timothy chapter 2 and 1 Corinthians chapter 14.
Yeah, and read, just on the surface, Paul plainly states that women should be silent.
That they shouldn't teach.
Right, and that they shouldn't exercise authority over men.
So before we get too deep into this...
Actually, yeah, before diving into the history, it is crucial to establish a really clear boundary for our exploration here.
Good idea.
Conversations around modern gender roles, especially involving religious texts, are incredibly sensitive. I mean, they trigger intense, polarizing debates.
Which makes total sense.
It does. So I want to assure you, the listener, that our goal today is not to endorse a specific theological viewpoint or take a side in modern cultural politics.
We're not picking teams.
Not at all. Our sole objective is strictly to unpack the situational context presented by our source material. We are simply examining the history, the culture, and the text itself.
Right. We are acting purely as historical detectives today. Okay, let's unpack this. If you are just a casual reader, or, if you've been handed these verses as a universal absolute law, they sound like a blanket ban on women speaking.
They really do. It reads like a permanent constitution.
So how does the source material justify arguing that we've been reading this entirely wrong for centuries?
Well, basically by pointing out that Paul wasn't writing a timeless universal constitution for humanity.
Okay.
He was a pastor and a church planter writing desperate letters to put out literal fires in specific cities.
So he was performing triage.
Exactly. The source argues that to understand the medicine, you have to understand the disease. And one of the most severe diseases infecting the early Christian communities was happening in the city of Ephesus.
Okay, I am trying to picture Ephesus in the 1st century. What is the fire Paul is trying to put out there? Like, why does he suddenly draft a letter telling the women in that specific city to essentially sit down and be quiet?
To understand Ephesus, you really have to understand the Artemis cult.
Artemis, the Greek goddess.
Right, but Artemis wasn't just a minor mythological figure there. The Temple of Artemis in Ephesus was literally one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world.
Oh, wow, so it was huge.
Massive. It was the absolute economic, cultural, and religious center of the city. The cult of Artemis dominated everyday life, and central to this cult was an ideology of female spiritual superiority.
Wait, really? When I think of ancient Rome or Greece, I just assume it's a completely male-dominated patriarchal society across the board.
Usually, yes, but Ephesus was a unique anomaly because of this cult. The Artemis cult had its own highly specific origin myths. Like what?
Well, they taught that the female deity was supreme, that women were spiritually superior to men, and crucially, Some of the local myths circulating in that region suggested that woman actually predated man.
Wait, they thought women were created first.
Yeah, that woman was the originator of life, and man was the secondary, inferior creation.
Okay, that is wild. So how does a pagan temple myth end up causing a crisis in a brand new first century Christian house church?
Through syncretism, basically the blending of different beliefs.
Oh, okay.
As people in Ephesus converted to Christianity, they didn't just instantly drop all their cultural baggage. I mean, you know how it is.
Right, old habits die hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some of the women entering the Ephesian church were bringing these Artemis myths right in with them. According to the historical backdrop, they were spreading false genealogies.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, they were pushing disruptive, cult-inspired ideas and engaging in this, well, domineering style of teaching that completely contradicted the foundational Jewish and Christian scriptures. So they were essentially trying to hijack the new community with Artemis theology.
Precisely.
Man, I'm having a massive aha moment right now. If that is what's happening in the room, it completely changes how I read Paul's letter.
How so?
Well, in 1 Timothy, Paul says, "For Adam was formed first, then Eve." I have always heard that quoted as Paul establishing some eternal, divinely mandated gender hierarchy.
Right, that's the common interpretation today.
But if the women in Ephesus are running around claiming women were created first and are spiritually superior, I mean, Paul isn't making a broad statement about all men and women. He's fact-checking a local cult.
What's fascinating here is how precise Paul's countermeasure is once you see the threat. He is directly attacking the Artemis creation myth.
He's setting the record straight.
Exactly. He is pointing back to the Genesis text to say, no, your local goddess myth is incorrect. Look at the actual scripture. His words are a targeted strike against a specific group of people who are using false mythology to dominate the teaching space.
Wow.
The core issue in Ephesus wasn't that women were speaking. The core issue was that false, domineering cult teaching was tearing the community apart.
That makes so much sense. It's like a modern-day fact check
Yeah.
or a doctor prescribing a heavy antibiotic for a severe local infection. You have a cult trying to take over the church. Bam! Silence the people spreading the cult myths.
That exactly.
But I'm going to push back here for a second because that explains Ephesus. But Paul writes a very similar command to the church in Corinth. He tells the women there to be silent too. Was the Artemis cult infiltrating Corinth as well?
No, the Artemis cult was very specific to the region around Ephesus.
Okay.
The situation in Corinth was distinctly different, even though the prescribed solution silencing certain people sounds remarkably similar to our modern ears.
So what was the disease in Corinth if it wasn't Artemis?
Chaos. Pure, unadulterated chaos.
Chaos. Like people just acting wild.
Pretty much. To understand Corinth, you have to realize that early churches didn't meet in pristine sanctuaries with pews and a polite schedule.
Right. No stained glass windows.
No, they met in the courtyards and dining rooms of people's homes. And in Corinth, these gatherings had devolved into total disorder. The historical records suggest people were speaking in tongues simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, shouting prophecies over one another and just constantly interrupting.
It sounds like a modern town hall meeting where the microphone is broken, there's no moderator, and everyone is just shouting their grievances at the ceiling.
That's a great way to picture it. It defeats the entire purpose of gathering, which was supposed to be about learning and building each other up.
Okay, so where do the women fit into this chaos?
Well, layered into this chaos was a massive cultural and educational gap between men and women in the first century Greco-Roman world.
Yeah.
Men generally had access to public education and philosophical debate. Women, by and large, were kept uneducated and restricted to the domestic sphere.
Which means when these women enter a Christian gathering, a space that was actually radically inclusive for its time, they are suddenly hearing complex theological concepts for the very first time.
Exactly. And because they lacked the foundational education, they were naturally asking a lot of questions.
Which makes sense.
It does. The problem was how they were doing it. In these chaotic Corinthian meetings, women were apparently calling out basic questions during the teaching.
Like just interrupting the speaker.
Yes, or shouting across the room to their husbands because men and women often sat separately, asking them to explain what was going on.
Oh, man. So when Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 14 that women should remain silent and ask their husbands at home, he's not saying women are inherently unfit to speak.
Not at all.
He's trying to get the room under control. He's saying, please, stop yelling your questions across the dining room, write them down, and ask your husband when you get home so the speaker can actually finish their sentence.
Exactly. He is prescribing order. It's like a custom fitting for each foot, different patients, different medicines.
That's a great analogy.
And, he actually tells multiple groups to be silent in that exact same chapter.
He does.
Yeah. He tells the people speaking in tongues to be silent if there's no interpreter. He tells the prophets to be silent if someone else gets a revelation. The command for the wives to be silent is just one part of a broader crackdown on a chaotic environment that was preventing anyone from learning anything.
Okay, but if a doctor prescribes a heavy antibiotic for a specific infection, you don't then force healthy people to take it every day as a vitamin, right? Is that what the source is arguing happened here?
Essentially, yes.
I'm struggling a bit with this, though. If these commands in Ephesus and Corinth were just localized triage, a temporary antibiotic for false teaching and bad manners, did Paul envision a completely silent church for women?
Good question.
Like, what did a healthy community actually look like to him? If we take away the disease, what was the baseline?
The baseline is actually incredibly active. If we look at the historical counter evidence, when the church was functioning healthily, Paul actively collaborated with female leaders.
Really?
Yeah, the source material is very explicit about bringing the receipts here.
Well, let's look at those receipts. Because if Paul meant for women to never teach or have authority, you'd think his own inner circle would reflect that. But the source brings up 3 massive counterexamples, starting with a woman named Priscilla. What is her story?
Priscilla and her husband Aquila were close associates of Paul. And the text notes a specific incident involving a man named Apollos.
Who was Apollos?
Apollos was a highly educated, eloquent, and influential figure in the early church. He was a powerhouse speaker, but his theology was slightly incomplete.
Okay.
The historical texts record that Priscilla, along with her husband, pulled Apollos aside and accurately explained the way of God to him.
Wait, really? So you have a woman directly instructing and correcting the theology of a top-tier male scholar?
Exactly.
That completely shatters the surface-level reading of the letter to Ephesus, where Paul supposedly bans women from teaching men. If the ban was universal, Paul would have condemned Priscilla. Instead, he constantly praises her.
He does. And then you have Phoebe. Paul explicitly refers to Phoebe as a deacon of the church in Cenchreae.
A deacon.
Yes. And in the first century, a deacon wasn't just someone who handed out programs at the door. Deacons were recognized leaders, administrators, and teachers.
Wow.
Furthermore, history strongly suggests Paul entrusted Phoebe to carry his magnum opus, the letter to the Romans, all the way to Rome.
Wait, she was his mail carrier.
Much more than a mail carrier. In the ancient world, the person who delivered a letter was often the one who read it aloud to the recipients.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they answered their questions about what the author meant. Phoebe was Paul's emissary. She was explaining his most complex theological letter to the church in the capital of the Roman Empire.
Okay, that is a staggering level of authority. But the source mentions a third woman, and this one feels like the biggest plot twist of all. Junia.
Yes. In Romans 16, Paul sends greetings to a woman named Junia and calls her outstanding among the apostles.
An apostle. When I hear apostle, I think of Peter, James, John, the ultimate foundational authorities of the early church. Are you saying Paul recognized a woman in that same tier? What did an apostle actually do in the first century?
An apostle was a sent one, right? A church planter, a pioneer who established new communities, often facing immense persecution.
So they were on the front lines.
Absolutely. Paul mentions that Junia had even been in prison with him for her work. To be an apostle was to hold the highest level of respect and authority in the early Christian movement, and Paul casually names a woman as being outstanding in that exact role.
Man, if you're listening to this, and you grew up being told that Paul's letters were the absolute final word on why women can't hold leadership roles, hearing about Priscilla, Phoebe, and Junia is incredibly jarring.
It creates a lot of tension.
It creates this massive tension. Actually, I want to talk about a contradiction that is driving me crazy right now from the source.
Okay, let's hear it.
We were just talking about 1 Corinthians 14, where Paul says women should be silent. But if you flip back literally 3 chapters to 1 Corinthians 11 in the exact same letter, Paul is giving instructions on how women should pray and prophesy out loud in the public gathering.
Right, he does.
How does that make any sense? Does he want them speaking or not?
If we connect this to the bigger picture we've been painting, there is no contradiction. In chapter 11, Paul assumes and affirms that women will be using their voices.
So he expects them to speak.
He fully expects them to speak, pray, and prophesy, provided it is done in an orderly, respectful way that builds up the community. He gives them guidelines on how to do it properly within their cultural context.
But then 3 chapters later, he hits the mute button.
Because 3 chapters later, he is no longer talking about healthy, edifying speech. He is addressing the specific moments when the gathering has broken down into a chaotic shouting match.
Oh, I see.
He isn't banning women from speaking, he is banning chaos.
Oh.
He affirms their voices when they contribute to the health of the church, and he restricts their voices just as he restricts the men speaking in tongues when they are causing disorder.
So the mechanism behind Paul's rules is entirely about the health of the community.
Exactly.
If you are building people up, speak. If you are shouting across the room because you are confused, or if you are trying to hijack the church with an Artemis cult myth, sit down, be quiet.
That's it in a nutshell.
Which brings us to the most frustrating question of this entire deep dive. If it is this clear historically, why have we gotten it so wrong for so long? Why did we take the temporary medicine and turn it into a permanent vitamin?
Honestly, gets of historical distance.
What do you mean?
We are 2,000 years removed from the Artemis cult. We don't see the Temple of Artemis looming over our cities today. We are 2,000 years removed from these specific, chaotic shouting matches in the Corinthian dining rooms.
So we just lack the context entirely.
Right, because we don't see the original fire. We don't recognize the bucket of water for what it is.
We just see a heavy bucket, and we assume we're supposed to carry it around forever.
Precisely. We treat ancient situational pastoral guidance as a standalone legal code. But for Paul, the goal was never about establishing an arbitrary hierarchy of who gets to talk.
It was about something bigger.
The goal was always the survival of sound doctrine and the edification of these fragile early communities.
So what does this all mean? Regardless of your personal background or where you land on modern church leadership, this whole exploration is a masterclass in media literacy.
It really is.
It shows how incredibly dangerous it is to strip a text of its historical context. When you separate the prescription from the patient's diagnosis, you can weaponize a localized attempt to save a community and turn it into a universal gag order.
And the source material actually uses this historical foundation to pivot into a broader discussion about practical application today.
What kind of application?
Well, exploring what it means for, quote, men to lead and women to flourish in their God-given roles within the author's specific theological framework.
Right.
But irrespective of the theological conclusions the source draws next, the historical groundwork we've unpacked today stands on its own. Context dictates meaning.
It absolutely does. If we distill everything we've covered today, the main takeaway is that Paul's harsh-sounding commands were never drafted to silence half the human race for the rest of time.
Definitely not.
They were urgent, localized medicine meant to save early churches. He was fighting off the infiltration of Ephesian cult myths and trying to bring order to Corinthian chaos.
And we know this because of how he acted when things were actually healthy.
Exactly. When the environment was healthy, the history shows us women were actively teaching top scholars, leading as deacons, and serving alongside Paul as outstanding apostles.
As we wrap up this historical investigation, I want to leave you with a lingering thought.
Lay on us.
We've spent this entire time realizing that we were reading Paul's half of a very heated, very specific argument. If these heavily debated verses were actually just highly specific triage for ancient local dramas, it makes you wonder.
Wonder what?
How many other supposedly universal rules in historical or religious texts are actually just one-sided phone calls where we've completely lost the other half of the conversation?
Oh, man. That is a brilliant and slightly terrifying question to sit with.
It kind of flips everything on its head.
It really does. We've been reading the answers for centuries without ever knowing the questions. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was a pleasure to unpack all this.
We hope it gave you some massive aha moments, and more importantly, we hope it encourages you to always check the name on the prescription bottle before you swallow the text. Keep questioning the context behind the information you encounter, and we will catch you next time.
In ancient Ephesus, the myths were spreading wide. Women taught what pagan stories lied. Artemis whispered, woman rose above, twisting Eden, questioning God's love. But Paul stood firm with apostolic care, not to shame, but guard what should be there. order and truth. Let the church arise, sound doctrine spoken under open skies. Not one shoe for all, but each foot finds its place. Custom fitting of mercy and grace. In Corinth, chaos filled the gathering hall. Questions shouted, interrupting the call. Paul said, ask at home, let peace remain, so the gospel clearly could be proclaimed. He wasn't silencing a woman's voice, but restoring order, giving truth its choice. In order and truth, let the church arise, sound doctrine spoken under open skies. Not one shoe for all, but each foot finds its place. Custom fitting of mercy and grace. Priscilla taught Apollos in the way. Phoebe served and women learned to pray. Not forbidden every word to speak, but only when the gathering stayed weak. In order and truth, let the church arise, love and edification be our guide. Every voice in harmony gives praise to the Savior, ancient, same always. Custom fitting of mercy